Welcome to Event Horizon, the show where I take a walk down the conspiracy path with a splash of the paranormal. It's the show you'd get if David Icke and the X-Files had a baby. Today's show is called ESP, Guardian Angels, and the Adjustment Bureau. What do I mean by ESP? Extrasensory perception. Some call it the sixth sense. Some call it second sight. It really is defined as reception of information not gained through physical senses. There are those who argue that when you're born, you have this second sight, this sixth sense, because as a baby you have no communication skills other than the senses you developed prior to birth to communicate with your mother. So at birth you have no context, so everything that is receptive to the human body is available to a newborn. There is no context. You have nothing to compare to, so what is presented is what you perceive. And so the sixth sense, being the sense that is most prevalent to a newborn, the most used, is the most powerful at birth. Some experts argue that sense is eroded over time because the baby can sense the mood of the mother, who constantly smiles at the baby but internally may be struggling with postpartum depression or just fatigue. And so the confusion in the facial expressions and the mood of the mother starts to erode that extrasensory perception. Now, what are these skill sets that make up this extrasensory perception? Intuition, the ability to acquire knowledge without proof. Telepathy, transmission of information from one person to another without using physical interaction. Clairvoyance, the ability to gain knowledge about objects, people, places, events, using this sixth sense or second sight. Precognition, the ability to see the future. Retrocognition, the ability to see the past. And mediumship, that's when you see dead people. You can channel the dead. I've thought long and hard about these abilities and wondered, are these real abilities? Or are these abilities tied to the age-old conversation about guardian angels? Are there spirits that are tied to you and that spend their time guiding your path throughout this dimension? Certain books, Celestine Prophecies, for example, argue that you are part of a spirit collective, that your spirit has been fragmented, and that there are dozens of spirit fragments connected to your soul, that at any given point when they're not on this plane, they are in the spiritual plane praying for you, your guardian angel. And they're looking out for you and in some cases giving you that nudge to stay on path. And that when you're in tune with this spiritual group, you can sense what they are screaming to you as your destiny. You get off the path, it's not so clear. Kind of like the old TV stations and the rabbit ears that you'd have to twist and turn to get the station to come in just right so you can hear everything. When those rabbit ears aren't pointed in the right direction, you may see a picture but no sound, or vice versa. And so some have argued that connection between you and your spirit group may work somewhat like that. That there are things that may distort your spiritual field. Fear, doubt, anger, all spiritual blockers that keep you from having this dialogue with that group. But when you are in tune, some argue you receive those messages. And in some cases, they hit you with a blunt object, even making contact with you in this plane to guide your direction. I know exactly what you're thinking. You're thinking, Mark, please put the cognac down. But no, I'm serious. There are many leaders and individuals who have been nudged back on track through interactions with guardian angels. Or maybe they were blessed with some form of extrasensory perception. Don't know. George Washington, a founder of the country, the first president, claimed he saw an angel at Valley Forge during the winter of 1777 and 78. That was when he was at his lowest point. His men, ravaged by the winter, supplies at their lowest, everything looked bleak. But Washington claimed that this angel, this beautiful spirit, showed him a vision of the America that would carry his legacy forward. One by one, it showed dots on a map that illustrated all the capitals of the great states that would become a part of this new country. And of course, this inspired Washington to inspire his men to push on to victory, because he got a glimpse of that future. Now, not all of those interactions work the same way. Not all of them. How many of you are fans of Family Guy? I know I am. How about American Dad or the Cleveland Show when it was still in its first run? All of those are the brainchild of Seth MacFarlane, the creator of those shows, and he voices a lot of the characters in those shows. Seth MacFarlane was supposed to be on American Airlines Flight 11 on September 11th, 2001. That date might sound familiar because we all know it as 9/11. For some reason, he drank too much and missed his flight by 10 minutes. I'm going to round up and say he missed it by 11 minutes. Makes the story a little cooler, doesn't it? Flight 11, 9/11, and he missed the flight by 11 minutes. But the official story is 10 minutes. He missed the flight by 10 minutes, and we all know what eventually happened with that flight. Was that his subconscious extrasensory perception keeping him from that plane? Was that a guardian angel making sure he tied one more off that night so he would not wake up on time? He had every intentions of making that flight, but didn't. There are many other stories of celebrities and individuals who, in the same vein, were supposed to be on boats or planes or cars that didn't make it to their end destination, and for whatever reason, they decided to go left when others went right. Elizabeth Taylor and Kirk Douglas were supposed to be on a flight with Elizabeth Taylor's husband going to a award ceremony. She was sick and Kirk Douglas didn't want to go. His plane never made it. We all know Kirk Douglas, the 100-year-old Kirk Douglas, and Elizabeth Taylor going on to marry many more men and living to the age of 76. Was there something there telling Kirk Douglas, who by all accounts was being berated as a chicken for not getting on the flight, was there something there keeping him? A perception, a sense of the events that were to come? Or was there that guardian angel just tapping him on the shoulder? It's hard to know. Like always, I'm going to give you a little splash into my own interactions with these perceptions, these angels, and possibly even an adjustment bureau. There's 6 examples that have I wouldn't say haunted me, but they have been with me in my soul, tapping me, making me wonder about this plane that we live on. I've told you about a number of the interactions that I've had, the ghosts that I've seen. But I'm going to give you a peek into the window that is the extrasensory perceptions or guardian angels that I perceive are out there. When I was in the first grade, I had a dream. It was almost like an out-of-body experience. I saw myself as an older person, 18 or 19 years old, seated looking up at a tower clock. For those of you who saw Back to the Future, somewhat similar to that. The big tower clock that got struck by lightning. It was only a frame. There was no movement. I just saw a frame, like a portrait of me, sitting and looking at this tower clock. There were other people. There was a larger building complex around this tower clock. And it felt collegiate. That image, which felt as real as my own reality, is what inspired me to go to school in Hanover, New Hampshire. When I received the college booklet in the mail and opened the first page of that college booklet when I was in high school and saw the same image that I had seen in my dreams in the first grade, it was like a rush of mental adrenaline telling me, this is what you saw. It was like being hit in the face with a stop sign. This is it. This is the place. You've been there in your dream. This is the place for you. When I was in the 10th grade, I was driving my little Honda scooter around town. And, you know, the little Honda scooters go about 40 miles an hour. And I had a little cool one that I still have. And this thing was just fast enough to get on the highway, but slow enough where cars could wipe you out if they weren't paying attention. Motorcycles already have a difficult time. Scooters have an even worse time. And back in the 80s, when they were relatively new, you were sitting duck if you didn't know what you were doing. I was riding the scooter at this point in a little town called Linden, Alabama, where my parents grew up. Dad had loaded it in the back of the truck and taken it down because we were going to spend a number of weeks down there, and I wanted my little scooter to ride around. And I had been hanging out at the basketball court and softball field and, you know, with all the relatives and friends, just having lots of fun. A nice fog rolled over that evening and made it pretty difficult to see. Now, I was less than a half a mile from the house. And as nighttime took over and the fog rolled in, I started riding back towards the house, taking all the precautions. Helmet, the light on the front comes on automatically with the start of the engine, and I'm riding on the side of the road that I'm supposed to ride on. Fog is fairly thick, and I'm thinking, you know, a couple more turns and I'll be at home. When something immediately flashed into my head, move. It wasn't me saying it, but something said move. And I didn't ignore it. I moved the moped into what would have been oncoming traffic. And at the moment where I did that, a car that did not have its headlights on drove right past me. They were on my side of the highway. If I hadn't moved into what would have been oncoming traffic at that moment, it would have wiped me out. Now, I don't have to explain to you that scenario repeated itself back in Selma when I was on my way to a French club meeting at the Great Selma High School located on Broad Avenue. I remember this as if it were yesterday. I was crossing the historic Edmund Pettus Bridge, not in the direction that King took towards Montgomery, I was coming back the other way from the Montgomery direction back into Selma. And in those days, there was a clock at the Am South Bank right at the foot of the bridge that told you the temperature and the time. French Club meeting was at 7, and the clock at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge showed 6:23. When you cross that bridge coming back into Selma proper, there's a red light right at the foot of the bridge. As I came down this curved bridge, the light for me was green. Smooth sailing, just keep going right through the light and on down Broad Street to Selma High School, which is about 3/4 of a mile from the bridge, maybe a little longer. As I reached the foot of the bridge, that same voice that told me to move a year earlier said, "Stop." I squeezed both front and back brakes on that little red scooter and came to a complete stop at a green light, and a car barreled right through the light on Water Avenue, heading towards the historic St. James Hotel. If I ignore that voice, I'm on that windshield of that car. Let's fast forward. 1998. Been in Atlanta for almost 3 years at that point. I was working for one of the big 4 consulting firms, and we traveled every week. Leave out on Monday, come back in on Friday evening. Typically, we take the first flight heading out to whatever city we're working in, which meant leaving home for me at that point in time. Before I moved closer into downtown, I lived near the historic Stone Mountain. So my ride to the airport was about, at that point in 98, about a 30 to 45 minute. Now, today, it's a lot more congested trying to take the 285 to the airport. But then it's about a 35 to 40 minute drive, leaving at the time that I would leave, which was at 4:30 a.m. I pulled out of the garage and headed down Mountain Cove Road, which is a very steep road because we lived high up on Stone Mountain. So coming down the mountain was a very steep road that forced you to ride your brake all the way down to the bottom and really step on the gas if you were going back the other way. And a side note, I tried using that road to improve my physical endurance by trying to jog up it and bike up it, and never fully made it without stopping in all the time that I lived there. But this morning I was heading down that road, 4:30 a.m., and like Christmas Day, not many things were stirring. At the bottom of the hill, again, like on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, is a light that stops you, and then you make a left to head towards the on-ramp for 285. I don't know why. I got to the bottom of the hill. The light was red. There was nobody that you could see. It was me, the car radio, and I had my sunroof open. It's brisk. I loved looking up at the stars at that time of the morning on the drive to the airport. And the light turned green. Typically, I would just turn left and start going towards the on-ramp. Something said, stop, count to 3. So instead of hitting the accelerator, I counted to 3. When I said 3, a pickup truck was 3/4 the way through the light, going at what looked like or felt like 75 to 80 miles an hour. As he passed through the red light, which was red for him, green for me, our eyes made contact. I don't think he was expecting anyone to be up that early in the morning. So he wasn't planning on stopping for any red lights. Had I pulled out onto that street, he would have caught me from the passenger side and would have potentially flipped my car over. I can't describe to you how I felt when I made the eye contact with him as he barreled through that light, because I think both of us knew that in another dimension where I did not heed that warning, we both were probably dead. At the speed at which he went through that light, my car would have disintegrated if it didn't flip over. And surely he would have been thrown very hard against that steering wheel, if that truck even had an airbag. And if he didn't have a seatbelt on, he was going to be somewhere 3/4 of a mile down the road. I stayed in that spot and let the light change 2 more times. Because like I said, I knew in that moment that if there are multiple dimensions, there are more dimensions that are like this dimension. Somewhere I didn't make it. One of those scenarios I did. That was one of those on-off moments, left-right moments where you move, you don't survive. You stay, you live. You got to listen to the voice. And I did. Last year, my son and I were riding in his car. He was driving. We were coming back from the barber shop. He and I had gone to get our haircut, and we were coming back from the barber shop. The barber shop is a mile and a half from our house. Straight up Piedmont, and the barber shop is at the intersection of Piedmont and Peachtree. We could have walked, which we should have to get the exercise, but we drove. As we were turning off Peachtree onto Piedmont and heading back to the house, a young lady came off of Peachtree from the opposite direction onto Piedmont ahead of us on a 10-speed bike. She had on all the gear of someone that was going to do the Tour de France. The helmet, the spandex, the expensive bike. You got the sense that she knew what she was doing. She pulled in ahead of us and accelerated her speed down Piedmont, which is on a decline coming off of Peachtree heading towards 285. And so she picked up speed as we approached Far Road, where there's a nice little Waffle House on that corner. My son and I are just talking, and she's about a car length ahead of us as we approach the light, which is there on Piedmont and Far Road, where the Waffle House is. Light's green, so there's no need for us to stop, and there's no need for her to stop. But at the moment as we're approaching that intersection, something welled up inside of me. I looked at the speedometer. My son was doing the speed limit for that street, which is 40 miles an hour. As we're coming down that incline, and he's coming up closer onto the biker and closing that 2-car length distance that had been there between us as she had pulled out in front of us going down that incline. Something welled up in me. I turned to my son and I said, "Stop the car now." He's like, "What?" I said, "Stop now. You're going to hit her if you don't stop right now." He steps on the brake and brings the car to a complete stop. At the moment that he comes to a complete stop, I don't know what it was. A pebble or a bump. Didn't see anything significant in the road, but her front tire turned back towards the rear of her bike. And she flipped right over those handlebars, right in front of us. We would have run over her. I jumped out the car and ran to the front of the car to see if she were okay. Grabbed her by the arm and grabbed her bike and pulled her near the bus stop, which is on the corner of Piedmont and Far. Directed my son to pull into the parking lot of the Mr. Waffle. But by that point that I'd gotten her to the side, she said she was okay, that she was fine, that she was just embarrassed. She didn't know what had happened to the bike and why it did what it did, but she was fine. So I jumped into the car with my son and went another block to our house. He didn't say much. He just kept looking at me in the strange, amazed look. And when we pulled into the driveway and we were waiting for the garage door to go up, he said, "How did you know that? How did you know that her bike was going to flip her over?" I said, "Son, something told me she was going to fall." I don't know if we all have these perceptions, if we have guardian angels, if there is this adjustment bureau that's making sure we all stay on plan. There are days when I absolutely believe there are. And maybe there are people who have the script for the simulation in which we're living. And for those of us who break character they find ways to get us back on script. Maybe we're off script and they're trying to get us back on script with these little glimpses of what the reality should be, of what the world should be. The only thing I know is the next time you hear something in your head that says move, you better move. This has been Event Horizon. A little walk on the conspiracy wild side with a splash of the paranormal.